Hi everyone, welcome back to Chaos Creation Miniatures. My name is David and today we're diving into some mini painting madness for our ORKTOBER goals. We've got a trio of awesome miniatures lined up for you. We're going to transform these little guys into some vibrant, eye-catching pieces that are going to make your tabletop pop. So as you see here, just take a look. I'll be sharing tips and tricks for painting each one, so whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, I appreciate you sticking around. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any more of the chaos. So after applying a healthy base coat of black all over all the models for a primer, this is going to help the paint stick, I move over to Lupercal Green. Wog Flesh is a great base to apply onto your model to help start the greening process. I don't know how else to describe that. Wog Flesh is a great base to apply onto your model to help start the greening process. I don't know how else to describe that. Losing grip on the reins, industry shaping outdated in their veins. Artificial mind disrupting all their plans. Watching panic sweating in their suits and brands. They push the same old sound, same old. After I finish applying the Wog Flesh, making sure some of that Lupercal base green is still able to see through in the recesses, I go in with a Commando green, and this is going to start making the volumes of the muscles start to pop. Remember when going in with that Commando green, you don't want to cover up all of the Wog Flesh that's underneath. You want to make sure some of it still points through. That's what's going to make it feel like it's got a lot of volume. For a lot of the red trim, like the hat or the bracelets, I'm going to be using Wazdocker Red. I think it's pretty standard. It's named after the orcs, so I thought it would look good with the contrasting blue that I have. To start the highlights, I take some of that Wazdocker Red and I mix it with the Flash Gets Yellow to create a nice little orange that's going to be the mid-tone for the hat. And then I keep adding a little bit more of that Flash Gets Yellow to create the highlight until it's almost a pure yellow. Free the people's voice, let the future rhyme. Gatekeepers got it, power slips away. Digital revolution, taking down decay. Future in the hands of code all the way. Time for real. For the recess painting for the hat, I take a little bit of the Doomfire Magenta, really light, really small amounts, and just layer it on where like the cracks of the hat are or where seams would be. I start the blue for all of the armor painting. I'm using Ahriman blue. I think it's such a nice saturated blue that works really well in contrast to the reds that I've used. So I start with the base coat of the Armon Blue, and I work my way up, adding a little bit of Sky Blue from Vallejo, I think is the company who makes the Sky Blue I use. I use that to do the edge highlighting and create volumetrics. And here we have the final for the Grot. I think it turned out pretty good. Up next we have the Orc Boy. I chose the big shooter model just because I really like that big gun that he's holding. Very similar technique used throughout most of this model. It's going to be the same color profile with a couple of exceptions. I'll go over things like how I did the leather straps and all that. Again, we're starting with a nice base coat of the primer, make sure that the paint sticks to the model really well. Then moving in again with that Lupercal green for the base coat. This is going to start the green shading for the skin tone. Again, as before, using the Wog Flesh to start the volumetric highlights. It's a great base coat. I really like it. It's part of every orc I've ever painted. I have seen where some people will use a purple undertone instead of, let's say, the Lupercal green, just to give a little bit of liveliness into the model itself. Something I might try in the future, but I haven't tried it yet. Again, remember not to cover up all of the layer underneath. You want some of that green showing through. I start to then layer on that Commando green, keeping in mind not to cover up all of the Wog Flesh underneath. And because this is a bit of a thinner paint, you usually do it in multiple coats. What I like to do is I put down a little bit, let it dry, put a little bit, let it dry, and you're building up the values and the highlights by doing this more and more. I seem to have skipped the recording process, but the pants and the leather strap is 2 clean coats of Mournfang Brown. Wow, that's the wrong way to say it. Mournfang Brown from Citadel. After laying down the Commando green, we start to mix in a little bit of Moon Dust Yellow from the Army Painter paints. And we're going to lightly go over just the highlight points that you want to really be the focus around the scar on his face, his eyebrows, his ears, and the highest parts of all the muscles. The teeth are painted with Wraithbone White, and I didn't want it to be too bright and still be able to highlight part of the teeth. I think this is a good middle ground. Once I get most of the highlights to where I want them, I come in with a shade. I use the Soelia, I have no idea how to pronounce this, green shade from Citadel. I think it works really great if you overpaint some of the recesses and you really want to knock back and create more volume. So I really enjoyed how that looked, so I went and recovered all of the crevices of the arms and the muscles. Coming in with that Ahriman blue for all of the armor panels, a couple of the trim pieces. Again, I really like this blue. I think it really pops well on the tabletop and goes really well with the Deathskull Orks that I'm going for. Remember, for best coverage, I always recommend doing at least 2 coats. Again, coming in with the sky blue mixed with the Ahriman blue to start and creating some of those highlights and the edge highlighting of the armor panels. It's a really great way to show the definition and the angles throughout this piece. Mixing in more of the sky blue until we're almost at a pure sky blue with very little Ahriman blue mixed in. And that's going to give us the highest highlights on these blue armor pieces. So coming back in to fix the highlights, the green shade that I used kind of knocked everything back a little bit. So I come back in with the Moon Dust Yellow from Army Painter mixed with some of that Commando Green, and to get those really high highlights. I focus this more on the, again, really important parts. I then take that Morn Fang Brown, I have trouble saying that word, and mix in a little bit of that same Moon Dust Yellow and a little bit of, what is this one called? Fire Lizard Orange from Army Painter. And that's what I'm going to use for all of the highlights on the leather parts. And we're going to go, closer and closer to the Moon Dust Yellow the higher we get to the edges of the leather straps. And I find this gives a pretty convincing leather look, especially when you paint it on a little bit scratchy. It looks a little bit worn and torn. At this point, I realized that I forgot to do any of the recording that I needed to do for the backpack, which makes me a little sad because I was really happy with how it turned out. So instead, I'm going to just jump right into the skull. Again, painted the base coat with that Mornfang Brown. I tend to use that a lot for my underpainting. And then I come in with the Wraithbone White. Again, it's a nice off-white that works really well with contrast paints. And it's easy to build highlights up front because I could always come in with the titanium white to make the highlights a little bit cleaner. My camera focuses a lot like my ADD brain. Sometimes it's in focus, sometimes it's out of focus. So there we have the first Orc Boy finished. I was really happy with how he turned out as well. Up next we have the flashiest of Flash Gits. This is a repaint that I had done. I originally painted it back in like 2018. Really rough. I think I had just discovered how dry brushing works. It does not look great. So I decided to give it a little bit of extra love. I started by base coating all of the color out of it to make sure none of the original paint was showing through. I probably could have stripped the model, but I just didn't have the time to do that. Going right into the the Lupercal green into the arms and the faces and all the fleshy bits. So again, the same recipe is going to be used here for the skin. Lupercal green. Over the base coat is going to be the Wog Flesh. From there it's going to be the Commando Green from Army Painter. Then I'm mixing in the Commando Green with the Moon Dust. Almost exactly the same as the previous steps as before. Just with a little bit more detail because I had a little bit more time to focus on this one. And yeah, let's see how it turns out. Once again, mixing that Commando Green in with the Moon Dust Yellow from Army Painter, and going in and catching some of the facial details, the upper lip, the nose, the eyebrows, and the top parts of all of the muscles. It's very much a repetition of what I've already done in the previous models. A couple of new things that I've done with this part is going in with some Barbarian Flesh Pink around the lips and the fleshy wounds where like the fake arm is grafted or where the scar along the forearm is. The areas where I apply this highlight color as it gets brighter and brighter occupies a smaller and smaller area on the model. Again, making sure you don't cover up that previous layer, and it shows that gradient going from that underside color of the Lupercal green all the way up to the brightest highlight, which is almost a pure moon dust yellow. Then I use the highest highlight to really go through and pick out the points of interest. That's really just a light dot. Very little amount of that pure white yellow goes onto the edges of the eyebrows, the nose, the tops of the muscle. Really, it's not a lot. You don't want to overdo this. Overdoing it's going to blow out those details. So this is where you're going to see that there's the barbarian flesh being applied to kind of pinken and liven up the flesh around the metal grafts. Then we move on to the blue. Again, going back to that Ahriman blue, love this color, especially for things like this Ork's pirate hat and the skull and crossbones. It really gives that cool death skull color look. All of the armor panels get the same treatment. It's 2 coats of the Ahriman blue. Try to make it as clean as possible, not to go over anywhere of the skin areas that you've already painted. Mixing in some more of that sky blue to start building up the volumetric highlights, like on the gun and the top of the hat. Working my way through, mixing in more and more of the sky blue. Those shoulder panels, I wanted them to really feel cylindrical, especially the one with the perforated holes. It is exactly what it is. It's part of a cylinder, so understanding how to paint colors onto a cylinder is really going to help. After getting the highlights to the highest point for the blue, I move on then to the red. I didn't record doing the base coat of the red because it's the same as the earlier models. It's 2 coats of Wazdaka red, and then edge highlighted with the Evil Sun Scarlet to bring a little bit of saturation and color back into the trim. And then from there, mixing a little bit of that Flash Gets Yellow into it, it gives it, I don't want to say it's a glowy effect, but it does almost feel like it's really warm from the inside. Now, anytime I'm painting flat panels, whether it's like on a tank or big weapons, armor pieces, I really like this light striation, these light effects that go along. It might give the miniature a little bit more of a shiny look, but I think it is really good at portraying the gradients that you're going to see on a brand new piece of metal tech. And that's done the same way. It's slowly mixing more and more of the same colors we've used. So we're increasing the Flash Gets Yellow, we're increasing the moon dust to get the highest highlight point as almost the pure yellow from the moon dust itself. It adds a little bit of nuance in the detail. For the skull and crossbone, like the other models, anything that's bone white, I go with that wraith bone color first. It's a nice off-white. You can always highlight up to it. Now this is the part where I use a little bit of the contrast paint for skeleton horde. I water it down a little bit, do a nice wash over it. It really builds up depth in the recesses. While I wait for the wraith bone white to dry, I then take Army Painter's dry rust orange color and apply it over the squig that sits on his shoulder. I then use the same Wraithbone white to paint the eye. So here you see me putting the skeleton horde on all of the bone materials. There's the bone on the backpack, the skull and crossbones. Takes a little bit to dry, but it's going to give a very nice effect, especially once we go over it with the titanium white to bring those highlights back out. For highlighting the squig, I then take a mix between the moon dust, Army Painter's fire lizard, and that dry rust to make it kind of off orange pale skin color. Going back over the skull with the wraith bone right out of the jar to start building up the highest highlights. This is going to be kind of a mid-tone from the contrast paint that was applied earlier. And then I go in with the titanium white. I just use golden titanium white. I'm not a fan of most mini painting white colors. It tends to be very chalky, so I use it right out of the tube from golden. Going back into the eye, I then take that sky blue to stick with the limited kind of color palette that I'm using for my blues to go in to brighten up that eye on the squig. I then take a watered down black. I think I'm using Abaddon black here. I went with like a cat's eye on this squig. Then back to use the titanium white to do the eyeball highlights. Just do a little bit of a bigger highlight on the top left-hand side of the eye and then the bottom right, as though the light is going through the eye. Now moving on to the sword. The sword is probably my favorite piece of this model that I was really happy with. I was debating if I was going to go something energy field or glowy, some OSL, but I ended up settling on just doing almost like a stone steel abused piece of metal. Especially given the shape of the sword itself. I had used a generic knockoff blue mixed with a black for the base coat of this model for the sword, and then I went in and started to mix in a little bit of gray. I think I used rust gray from Citadel Paints, slowly mixing it in. And I work my way up until it's nothing but pure rust gray to give that cold steel look. One of the nice ways about doing it like this and using a very small brush, I apply it in a hatching technique, in those kind of straight lines. It gives it an almost scratchy feel to the metal as though it's been damaged in battle over time. I then mix the rust gray with a touch of that moon dust yellow just to give it a little bit of a warmer highlight. So it's not pure white. Pure white highlights do work, but I find there's not a lot of character in them, so adding a little bit of saturation to it definitely helps. For all of the metal parts, like the metallic arm, the gun barrels, and the gears on the back of the gun, I go back in with that bluish black undercoat that I started with the sword. I then, very similar to how I painted the rest of the armor, I build up the volumes, making sure not to cover up the previous layer, and painting it like a cylinder, because again, that's all this is. It's just repeated shapes. Mixing in more of that rust gray to develop the highlight all the way up to an almost near titanium white. And I mix in again that moon dust yellow. I think this is such a great highlight color for most things. It mixes it in, doesn't break too much of the way that the color looks, and it adds a little bit of the ambiance you're going with on the lighting. I also seem to have not recorded the gold, or I was trying to go for more of like a bronze or a brass. It definitely looks more gold for all of the bullets and the flash kit handle. But the gold also kind of works well because they're the flash kits. They're flashy. They want things that are going to look shiny and bright. So I stuck with it. Painting all the gears, the little nooks, the knobs for the metal parts on the back of the flash kit's gun. And then again, I go in and do the same thing for the arm, the metal hand. You know, smaller and smaller layers, working up the values, going from the deep blue black all the way up to a near white to give it a really near metallic look. And that's going to leave us with this fully finished flash kit. The flash kit unit, I probably will put the same amount of effort into all of them, only because I really like that unit, and I think I want it to be phenomenal. So there you have it. Those are the 3 models I've done so far for ORKTOBER. If you have any questions, thanks so much for sticking around. See you next time.